Hello and welcome back to The Art of Parenting. This is your host, Jeanne-Marie, and today I have the lovely Kate Hamilton here with us, actually calling in from Puerto Rico, which I always love doing this because people from all over the world can be here and then we can share this information with all of you. So, Kate, thank you for making the time to be here and to share a little bit about parenting and the imperfection of parenting. So thank you for being here.
And thank you for having me. And I really admire what you're doing. And I really love your podcast. Thank you.
That definitely makes my day. So, Kate, I always love to start with this question to know what your definition of the art of parenting is.
So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I love the fact that you realize or you say that parenting is an art, because it truly is an art. I come from a very analytical brain, and there is not one formula that works ever for parenting. And I think that my idea of the art of parenting is that you have to parent to the child that's in front of you. You have to be really aware of your biases, understand we have learned behaviors from our upbringing, and be cognizant of our partner's wishes and differences. And most of all, we have to believe in
our ability to parent. Wow, I love that, because I'm also, I'm host of this podcast, but I also am a birth doula. And that is something that I really encourage, mothers to be, to like own this idea that we're meant to do this. Like, we got this. Exactly.
It's scary.
It is.
Time, but it's okay to be scared. It's okay. And that scaredness we get to bring out and be ourselves and acknowledge our feelings. And it's okay to feel.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Wonderful. And before we get going, I would love, Kate, if you could take the time to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to do the work you're doing, and especially this new book that is coming out very soon, The Imperfect Parent, which, thank you for sending me a copy. It has been wonderful. And so, yeah, please share.
Okay. So, my background is corporate America. Then I got married and realized corporate America wasn't for me. And I became an entrepreneur with my husband. And my background, I'm an analytical person. And so I started thinking about my childhood and realized that my childhood wasn't the easiest childhood out there. And I realized that I had some really unique experiences. And I say unique, and I really probably mean difficult and a little different than the average child. And I really saw my parents struggling with raising myself and my siblings. And the first thing I realized was that I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't go through those experiences.
Right.
And my parents did the best they possibly could with the information they had, And by understanding that, I really saw, again, I'm very analytical, and I saw generationally, we had the wonderful opportunity to have my grandmother live with us for a large part of my childhood. So I saw my grandmother passing on some traits. Then I saw my father also acting the same way. And I realized that we're passing down things generationally that sometimes are good and sometimes are not.
Right.
And, one thing that I do know that I was good at was finding the patterns and finding ways to, if you can identify it, you can tame it. And if you can tame it, you can then hopefully change it. And so I realized that I had developed these skills throughout corporate America and as an entrepreneur. And I was like, wait a second, I can do this with my kids, and I need to write about it. So one of the big things I wanted to do was break some of the generational patterns that were being passed down, because I saw them being passed down with my parents. And I then, and being an analytical person, it was something that, it was very in front of me, and I knew that I needed to do something different. I didn't want my kids to have the same childhood that I had. But again, I'm going to go back and say is my parents did the best they could with the information they had, and I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't have those experiences. So I am grateful that I got the opportunity to go through some of those, but I wouldn't wish them on other people either.
Right.
And one of the things that my mother-in-law did when we were first married is she came and sat me down and told me a lot about my husband, how he was raised, and gave me her perspective. And the thing that it really taught me, it gave me an insight that I wouldn't have normally had about my husband. It helped me to be able to ask better questions when we were raising our kids. And it also helped me to understand the why behind my husband's passions and actions. And that really was the instigator of like, oh my gosh, I need to write this down for my daughter-in-laws. I mean,
I think that's great. I wish all mothers took the time to do that. I think that's such a wonderful thing because, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, but to me, it's so important in our parenting because I feel that a lot of times there's preparation to marriage and to the relationship, but there's very little preparation to parenting and knowing where our parenting partner is coming from, how they were raised, and such can make such a difference in how we partner to raise our children. So I think that's wonderful. And when you were describing at the beginning, I kept on thinking, did these realizations come when you became a parent? And I think you kind of answered that, right? When you had the need to write this book once you became a parent, I assume?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll be frank that when my husband says, let's do this parenting thing, let's have some kids. And I was like, yeah, I want kids, but that's tomorrow. And I'm not quite ready yet, hon. I got to read more, because I have this need. I want to be perfect, even though I know I'm not perfect. And every time I slow down, calm down, you can tell I have a lot of energy. But I need to do that to myself and teach myself to do that because it's okay. I mean, it's totally okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake because it's not okay to stop. It's not okay not to learn, but it's okay to make a mistake because, we had to fall down before we learned to crawl. We had to, fall again and learn to walk. And I mean, guess what? We survived those quote mistakes.
Right.
Or I like to call them learning opportunities.
So now that you've written this book and such, you're focusing more on parenting now, or are you still, because you said you were an interpreter, you have other businesses, I assume, or is this your...
No, I do. I have other businesses. Okay. My husband and I do distressed real estate and debt, and my financial brain will, go into that also. But I think that it was interesting because I was having a conversation with my son about prepping for this, and he's like, Mom, are you going to write another book? He's like, I really think you need to start writing a book about teaching kids about finance because nobody teaches finance. And so, I mean, and then the publishers came to me and goes, you should write a book about taking care of your aging parents because that's the stage I'm in now.
So you're a sandwich generation, as we call them, right? You still have children and you have your parents.
Yeah. And my boys now are in their 20s. Okay. My oldest is about to graduate from college, and the youngest is right behind him a year later. He's a junior in college. So, they're young men, really.
Right. They're off on their own, which is
Yeah.
wonderful as a parent to witness them kind of going off. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for that. So I'd love to get a little bit into the book because I know that your chapters are set up with these 5 focus. I love that they're all focuses. And I would love if we could take 1 or 2 and kind of go a little deeper in them. There's the focus on the family structure, on the family context, on communication, very important one, on creating order, which is one that is intriguing to me, and then focus on wisdom. Is there one that you want to maybe take and go a little deeper on? Or may I suggest one? Because I'm
Sure.
intrigued about your perspective on order. When I hear the word order, it means something specific to me. So I would love to know what that entails for you and how that can help families.
Well, so, to me, order in the family really, and the one big thing I really want to stress too about my book is that I wrote this book for my future daughter-in-laws, and it's a guide. It's not, I don't think any parenting book tells everybody how they should do their life. I think
No.
I want everybody to understand to take what works for them, discard what doesn't, and not everything I always say will be perfect for everybody. And this is just, I wrote this from my perspective and from what I learned and some of the mistakes I made and what I learned from those mistakes. So I think that's a really key factor about my book. That's, some parenting books are telling you what to do, and this is not
Well,
at all about that.
yeah, and I think the title says it all, right? The Imperfect Parent, because
Yeah.
I think we're thought to believe, or we're made to believe, that we have to be perfect, but there is no perfection, and it's really about the process. And I think you sharing what your process has been, and I think you sharing about your own upbringing of how, whether we can say it was good or bad or whatever, it is what it is, right? It is the cards that you were dealt with, and it's made you who you are. There's no perfection there, right? And we take what we have. And like you said, it's about changing that and healing whatever needs to be healed so that we don't pass it on to our children, so that we can talk about it and grow from it. So thank you for that. Like, no need to say it's not perfect because there is no perfection.
When you ask about order, I want to delve a little deeper. And in particular, is there something that you really want to know about?
So my background, I'm a Montessori educator, and order is one of the universal needs of young children. When I think of order, I think of it as the physical order, because we say that external order brings internal order. When I think of order, I think of simplicity. I think of having a simple environment for our children so that they can have that internal sense of order. And then order is also routines for me, right? In the rhythm and how we do things. So I just want, I'd love to know, what your perspective is. What does that mean when you say to families, focus on order, focus, that is an important focus in our families?
Yeah, I completely agree. And so for me, I sometimes like to make things complex to make them simple again. And so one of the things I remember doing was coming up with a family constitution. And our family constitution then got to say who said what and how we were going to have our family. So the kids then were an active participant. I was trying to teach civics also, but it really went back to, hey, I want you to be able to have a say I want you to feel that that you matter in this family. But at the end of the day, just because you matter doesn't mean your voice is more important than anybody else's voice in this family. And so to teach that concept of, what I consider order, I went complex to teach them this complexity of a structure that the United States has and a constitution and whatnot. But then we went and closed it down to this simple little thing and said, okay, mom has this, dad says this, what you say matters too. And even when we moved to Puerto Rico, we've lived here for 10 years, but when we moved, the kids were in 5th grade and 4th grade when we were discussing moving. And we gave them a say. We talked about it as a family. We set their expectations. We went and visited. We showed them what they were potentially, the schools they could go to, and gave them veto. And we let them understand that their words mattered. We also, when they had concerns, could pay attention to those concerns. It made it different and smoother for them to do the transition because they always knew, hey, they could raise their hand and say, Mom, this isn't working for me.
Right.
And so, yeah.
In a nutshell, when you say to focus on creating order, it's about really creating your mode of operation in that family, right?
Yeah.
That everybody understands they're all participants, that they have equal say. Maybe sometimes mom and dad have a higher say, that we need to establish. But I like that. So the children, all participants know that they have a voice. And I think that's super important. I do that with teaching families how to run family meetings, which sounds very similar, where it's really about, everybody has an opportunity to say what's bugging them, what they hope to change, and to find solutions together, which is always ideal.
Yeah, we even brought in, we lived, when the kids were younger, we lived in the town with my husband's family.
Okay.
And he has an extended family. And my parents even moved there also for a while. And so we had a lot of people giving us advice and input. And frankly, I asked for it. And so it wasn't unsolicited. But then, something I learned, I was asking for advice. And then when I wasn't implementing their advice, it became an issue.
Ah.
But in the same respect, then then I set up a structure that I said, hey, listen, I want to learn from you and I want to hear your perspective. And because I'm hearing your perspective doesn't mean I'm going to do your perspective. And when I sat them all down and I said, hey, maybe I could do something even better combined with your input. And when we have a collaborative environment, it might end up, one, I'm going to tell you what's going on even more. And two, you're going to get to be able to tell me what you want to tell me too. I'm going to listen.
Right.
I did that with the adults first, and then I turned around and did that with the kids too.
Which is genius. No, it's great. And it brings up a question for you about because I get this question a lot from parents, how to handle advice from our elders, from friends, from the internet, from people making comments on what we're sharing. How do you deal with that in a healthy way? Because sometimes it can feel judgmental, it can feel hurtful. And, then we start having this self-talk about we're doing it all wrong and so forth. So what's a healthy way to deal with advice that sometimes we ask for, sometimes we don't, but we receive it?
I have a really, really good friend who gave me unsolicited advice about the school my kids should attend. And it really put me in a difficult spot because I didn't want to tell her that her school was bad and point out all the negative things about her school that weren't good for my kids. But also, I knew my kids weren't going to thrive at that school. I'm dyslexic. My husband's dyslexic. Our kids are dyslexic. So certain kinds of education and ways of educating are different, and that we need to be educated differently than a kid who learns the way most other kids learn. And there's nothing wrong with her school. Her school was a great school, but she kept on badgering me. I mean, I use the word badgering, and I don't use that lightly, that I needed to send my kids there because she really respected me and we were good friends, and she wanted our kids to hang out and be good friends together. She
Right.
did it from the graciousness of a good heart, but she's a good friend, and I didn't want to go and say, no, your school's horrible because of these reasons. And so I said thank you to her. And I think the best advice sometimes is say thank you and no more, and just walk away. And that walk away, I mean, she was furious with me. I mean, and I didn't realize she was going to be furious at first. And we're still great friends, but she has enough tenacity to come and say, Kate, why did you just walk away? And I told her why. And I said, hey, your school's great, but if I sit here and tell you why it's bad for my kids, it would be putting it down in your eyes. And your school is a good school. It's just not good for my kids. And so sometimes not responding and not going into the why is actually better, and letting the moving on and taking the advice, say thank you, and then responding and giving them all these reasons. And she goes, okay, thanks for teaching me that. And it was the best thing, because if you started in, all I would have done is try to convince you even more of why this school was so good.
So just thanking for the advice, and that's it. Just,
That's it.
oh, okay, thank you. And moving on, and you can take pieces of it, or you can discard all of it, or, yeah. And I would just say, don't hate yourself on it. Like, don't do the shoulding, right? Oh,
yes.
that's not
shooting all over yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Wonderful. So let's move on to maybe how we can have conversations. So we talked about, getting advice from our elders, from our friends, and so forth. What about having conversations with our children that might be some tough topics, or, might be quote unquote uncomfortable issues? I mean, I believe that in a family, nothing should be uncomfortable, but, there could be things that come up, whether, it's, I mean, I don't know what would be an uncomfortable topic, but anyways, what is your perspective on how to have those conversations with our children in a good, open, healthy manner?
So I have this concept called the
8-year rule. Okay.
Yeah. And I just randomly chose the number 8 because 8 years before your child is going to be confronted with a topic or information that they need to know, start talking to your child about it. So you demystify and you create it as just a common thing. We talked about sex in our family all the time and thought nothing of it. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, politics. It was all talked about around our dinner table because we talked about it when they were really young. I mean, we started talking about concepts and ideas that people are like, you did what? I mean, for instance, let me take a simple one. My kids wrote a business plan. Remember, their parents are entrepreneurs. They wrote a business plan when they were in kindergarten and first grade. And we talked about the concept of, are you a business owner? Do you need a loan from the bank? Do you need an investor or do you need a partner? And the differences between that. And we also, my aunt is married to another woman. And when they were very young, we talked about it. And we didn't say any top. I mean, she's my favorite aunt. And so there weren't topics that were off the table. And we brought them up as normal, everyday concepts when they were really, really young. And they didn't understand it all at the beginning, but then they knew they could ask questions.
Right. So I just want some clarification around that, because I know for me, we often say to maybe not bring up kind of, bigger topics to children before they're ready or before they ask specific questions. So when you're saying we talked about it, it's more like you and your husband having conversations about certain topics and your children are there and witnessing and listening? Or is it that you're specifically talking to a child about a specific topic?
Well, it was more, for instance, I'll never forget this. We're doing laundry with my two boys, and my son picks up my underwear and goes, "Oh my gosh, there's blood on these underwears. Mom, what happened?" And I said, "Hey, this is a part of what a woman goes through. Would you like to know more?" And his brother's like, "Oh, I asked that question. I'm not sure you want to know." And the other brother goes, "Okay, tell me. When I feel uncomfortable, I will stop you." And
Oh,
but we would talk. And so my point is, we would have natural conversations when things came up, but we
right, right.
also tried to bring them up and show them and talk to them about it. If news articles, so we would bring news articles. "Hey, what do you think of this?" And controversial stuff at a very young age, "Hey, this is going on. What do you think? Why?" And talked
No.
about our perspective and heard their perspective.
And so important because probably, I don't know, you said, you were brought up a certain way. I know for me, I was part of a very kind of intellectual family. So there was a lot of conversation, but we were never asked our opinion. I heard a lot of what was going on in the discussions and so forth. But it wasn't until much later when we're young adults or teenagers that we can actually participate starting young, which I think is wonderful. And I think it's the way forward to make our children aware of what's going on without burdening them. I would be mindful that they are still children, and I wouldn't want to zap their innocence and their beautiful, positive outlook on the world with all the crap that's going on. So,
Yeah, but it's interesting. Their minds, I still remember a lot of conversations flooding in my brain, a lot of those conversations when they were little. And the innocence, sometimes I'm like, wow, you just solved this. And really, I can tell you where this concept came from. I was in a graduate business class, and the CEO of Conair was talking to us, and he said he asked his 16-year-old daughter about the hair dryer, and he said, "Why is our black hair dryer not selling?" And she looked at him, "Dad, it's boring. Just make it, just put colors on them. Just make them colorful and make them fun." And he did. And guess what? They sold a heck of a lot more
yeah, yeah,
hair dryers.
yeah. No, our children are very, very wise. And I know for me, they truly are our teacher. When the saying is that our children are our teachers, they are, because they come to the world with such wisdom. It's not lived experience, but it's like deep, old wisdom that is there. And that I think it's our job to make sure that it's always there and that it doesn't get, squished out of them. So.
Yeah.
So
And that's,
thank you.
I really respect the fact that I gave them always the opportunity. I hear what you say about keeping their innocence. And I always remember trying to make sure they had or felt like, hey, we've gone too far in a topic that I don't care to have this conversation anymore. And I made sure one child was excellent about saying, I don't want to talk about something. The other child, you had to watch his face
Mhm.
and be very aware of his feelings and help him be aware of his own feelings
Right,
also.
right. Thank you for all that. Anything else that you would like to maybe share a bit more about the book, about some of the focuses that, that makes a lot of sense and is super important to you?
Well, I think the one that pops to my head first is the whole concept of this day of grace. Um, and, you know, I learned it from a teacher that one of my sons had, a third grade teacher. And she had in her class that, listen, if you forget something for school and it's the first time you forget it, and you come and talk to me about it and you say something to me, everybody gets a day of grace. I get the opportunity to give you grace, not because it's earned, not because it's deserved, but because I graciously am giving you a gift of grace. And, you know, I really firmly believe that consequences are important to teach our kids, but there are times in life when everybody needs a little bit of grace.
Mm.
And
Yes.
so, and as the parent, to have this idea of, okay, you made a mistake and your consequence is this, but mom can give you, not because it's deserved, give you grace.
Right.
And it also taught me to give myself grace because I needed it a lot of times as much as they did.
I was going to say, very important to give ourselves some grace. Like it's like you say, that the title of your book, it's the imperfect parent. It's about learning as we're doing, and just like your parents did the very best they could with the tools that they have, our children will say the same thing about us. Like, oh yeah, my parents, they did the best they could with the tools they had. Like I think that's, human evolution. That's our parenting evolution. We know so much today about the brain, about emotions, about,
Oh,
sensory, about, dyslexia. All of this is like we're learning, and our children will have more tools and do things differently. So yeah, thank you for
I
that.
heard you say in one of your podcasts that the one wonderful opportunity that a family gets is to take the history and learn from the past so that we get to stand on the backs, and I mean, I'm not quoting it exactly, but your concept was that you get to stand on the backs of the people who raised you and taught you, and you get the opportunity to make even better and different choices because you have their experience to do
Yep.
it with.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
loved that. I
Mm.
mean, that rings so in my mind.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a work in progress for all of us.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this has been wonderful, Kate, and I'd love for us to wrap up with a more personal question. You mentioned that both boys are in their 20s. What's the age of the eldest? Okay, so let's say go back 22 years ago
Uh-huh.
when you were first expecting your firstborn.
Uh-huh.
Um, what wise words would you tell yourself knowing all that you know today?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is imperfection is good and normal. However, I think you've got to be quick to say you're sorry, slow to judge, and take the time to learn from the past so you can understand how to do it even better in the future.
Oof. Wise words, definitely. Yes. No, thank you for that. Any parting words that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, I think there's one really big thing I really would love people to remember is trust yourself and your decisions. Because I think we all sometimes give too much importance to the experts.
Mm.
And yes, we need to listen to the experts and do our own research. But at the end of the day, we know our children better than the experts do. And we need to trust that we know our children.
Yes, so, so true. I think we are the experts in our children and in who we are and how we want to show up as parents. This has been
Exactly.
delightful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and sharing all this beautiful work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love talking with you.